In 55 BC, after his famed crossing of the Rhine, which we covered in a previous video, Caesar decided that, despite the campaign season being near its end, it was time to launch one of the most ambitious expeditions in Roman history: the first crossing of the English Channel into Britannia. In this video, we'll go over the reasons Caesar gives for making the crossing, the challenges posed by this expedition, and the actual landing and ensuing battle that would secure the Roman beachhead in this fierce and mysterious land. Before we get started, if you like these kinds of videos and want to see more of them, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It just takes a second, and it greatly helps me continue making more videos like the one you're watching now. While the first Roman expedition to Britain occurred in the autumn of 55, this was not the first mention of the Britons or their involvement in the Gallic conflicts that had taken place up to this point. The first mention of Britain comes 2 years prior, in 57, during the campaign against the Belgae. While the British tribes did not take an active part in supporting the Belgae, the leaders of one tribe, specifically the Bellovaci, fled to Britain after Caesar had inflicted the first defeat against the coalition. While these agitators would not be brought up later in the text, this serves as the first hint we have of the sympathetic relationship that existed between Britons and Gauls. The next mention of Britain comes the following year, in 56 BC, during Caesar's campaign against the Veneti and their allied tribes. In this instance, Caesar names the Britons specifically as one of the allied tribes sending reinforcements to the rebelling Veneti. Here too, however, the focus of the text is not so much on the movements and actions of the allied tribes, but on the nature and course of the naval engagement between the Romans and the Veneti, and the challenges that had to be overcome to topple the far superior Gallic ships. As is customary for Caesar and his writings, he lists his reasons for taking certain actions first before describing their subsequent consequences. Caesar's exact words concerning the Britons are as follows: Caesar changed his course to set out for Britain, aware as he was that our enemies in almost all our wars with the Gauls had received reinforcements from that quarter. Naturally, this implies that the involvement of the Britons was perhaps greater than mentioned in previous books. Perhaps the coastal tribes had sent reinforcements to the Belgae, or perhaps Caesar considers the Britons' sheltering of the Bellovaci fugitives to be essentially equivalent to declaring themselves allies in common cause against Rome. Either way, Caesar was intent on using the little time remaining in the season to send a preliminary force to simply land on and make contact with the locals. This would provide valuable information on both the culture and nature of the natives, as well as necessary scouting on the harbors and approaches to the island. Caesar, however, was at a great disadvantage due to the lack of reliable information about the island and its inhabitants. He summoned traders from all over Gaul who had made the journey, and conducted interviews with them to determine the geography and lay of the land, while sending out emissaries of his own to land in Britain and make contact with the locals. The Britons naturally caught wind of Caesar's intentions, and several communities sent envoys to Gaul to make contact with Caesar and establish friendly relations with the Roman Republic. These issues settled, Caesar gathered 2 of his legions, along with a large contingent of cavalry, and waited for the weather to calm and give him a chance to make the very first crossing into Britain. Caesar had in his command a mix of warships and transports that numbered over 100 vessels in total. Of these, 18 were dedicated to the cavalry, who were setting off from a different port, but were being delayed by strong winds. Despite this setback, Caesar set sail during the night and reached Britannia the following morning. Staring Caesar in the face, however, were the formidable cliffs of Dover, upon which sat a barbarian horde that had sighted the fleet and began stalking it along the coast. Caesar mentions that the geography was so favorable to the defenders that missiles cast from atop the cliffs were able to hit their mark on the ships below. Caesar made his way about 7 miles to the east, where he found a shore he deemed appropriate for landing, and this is where the battle for Britannia began in earnest. The Romans faced a number of extreme difficulties right from the outset, which Caesar lists as follows. First, the British chariots had been sent ahead, arriving at the beach before the Romans. These mounted warriors were extremely effective in preventing the legions from disembarking. Compounding this problem was the fact that the ships were too large to be beached, except in deep water, where the Romans would be forced to jump down and attempt to fight in the crashing waves, with their weapons and armor weighing them down. The Britons, on the other hand, stayed in the shallows and were able to overwhelm any Roman who was fighting his way forward. This led to general panic among the Romans, who were, according to Caesar, wholly unaccustomed to this kind of fighting, and this fear prevented them from continuing their efforts. Seeing this, Caesar gave orders for the warships to be brought to bear along the enemy's exposed flanks. These ships, which were brimming with slingers, archers, and artillery machines, showered the Britons in the shallows from safe range, forcing them to retreat a short distance. The legionaries, however, were still hesitating, until one man, an Aquilifer of the 10th Legion, stepped forward and addressed his men. "Jump down, soldiers! Unless you want to betray our eagle to the enemy, I at least shall have done my duty to the Republic and to my commander." Come on, you if you wanna live forever! After shouting these words, the Aquilifer leapt from the transport and began to carry his eagle toward the enemy. This act was so inspiring to the men around him that the other legionaries began flinging themselves off the boats so as not to be shamed by the courage shown by this lone standard-bearer. The Romans had successfully taken the shallows, but the Britons were not yet beaten. The barbarians, recovered from the shock of the Roman artillery, began to fight back, using their cavalry to effectively hold the Romans back in the water and keep them from reaching dry land. The Romans, too, in the chaos of disembarkation, had found themselves grouped together with men not of their usual unit, and so, similar as to what happened during the war against the Nervi 2 years prior, wherever a man found himself, there he made his stand, regardless of which group he found himself with. The result of the battle rested on a knife point, and Caesar, seeing that dry land was only a few short feet away from his men, gave an order for the smaller warships and scout ships to be filled with men. These more nimble vessels were able to beach themselves in shallower waters, and so, wherever he saw his men struggling, he ordered one of the smaller ships to land and support the legionaries. This influx of soldiers was enough to push the Britons back from the water's edge and allow the Romans to move forward. Once the legions found themselves on dry land, their vigor was renewed, and they charged forward and routed the enemy that had nearly handed them their first defeat. Unfortunately for Caesar, the ships carrying the cavalry had failed to make the rendezvous, and without them, he was unable to pursue the barbarians inland. The battle was over, and with it, the first step in civilizing the island dwellers was completed. The expedition would encounter further difficulties in this first crossing, but the following year, Caesar would come back, this time setting up permanent alliances. The quest to civilize Britain would sadly fall off after the assassination of Caesar and subsequent civil wars, but a century later, during the Pax Romana, the Emperor Claudius would make his return and cement Rome's place in Britannia for the foreseeable future. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it and would like to see more videos like this, please leave a like and subscribe. Until next time.